We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome, my name is Ian and this channel is all about music and art, and in this series of videos we've been looking at what is happening regarding the music streaming in the UK. The UK Government's Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the ways that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee were going to inquire into the impact of the streaming on the future of the music industry. This article stated that the inquiry would consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. Now, I knew that some high-profile musicians and music industry types were going to be giving evidence to the committee. And the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November 2020. And it continued through December into January and February of this year, 2021. Now, these were long meetings lasting over 3 hours. So what I've done is I've edited them all down into shorter videos, and you can find a link to all the previous meeting videos in the description down below. I've also created an introduction for each section, and if you want to, you can skip straight past those bits to the questions by clicking on the timestamps. Again, all of this stuff is in the description. So in this video we'll look at the session from the 23rd of February 2021, and I thought it would be worth providing a short background to the witnesses giving evidence. So in this evidence session we have Paul Firth from Amazon, Horatio Guitares from Spotify and Elena Siegel from Apple Inc. Paul Firth took on the role of Director of Amazon Music International, responsible for non-US territories, in 2017. His previous position was as Director of Amazon Music Europe. London-based, Firth has worked at Amazon for nearly 10 years, starting off as Head of Buying for Music and MP3s at Amazon Music in 2011. Next we have Horatio Guitares, who is Spotify's General Counsel and Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs. Based at Spotify USA's headquarters in New York City, Horatio is responsible for overseeing Spotify's global legal, regulatory and government affairs, and serves as Corporate Secretary to its Board of Directors. And lastly, we have Elena Siegel, a wide respected figure in music industry circles. Elena was appointed as Apple's Music's first ever Global Director of Music Publishing in 2018. She's a qualified lawyer, originally joined Apple in 2006 after 4 years as an associate at a Los Angeles-based law firm. As legal director of iTunes International, she oversaw a range of legal and licensing matters for iTunes and Apple Music, and in 2015 she headed up global licensing for the launch of Apple Music itself. All sessions were chaired by Julia Knight, and the complete list of committee members and relevant links are in the description down below. This recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament's terms and conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or audio in any way. I can't use the material for satire or use it on a website or social media platform that promotes, encourages and facilitates illegal activity or encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 4 from the session from the 23rd of February 2021 into the economics of music streaming.
I have to say, very apt. And our next question is going to come from Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Now we've got the royal headlines out of the session. Perhaps we can go back to music streaming. In fact, I've been streaming during this session. I was quite insulted, Horatio, actually, when you were talking about low users on Spotify not being as valuable consumers as people who just play it all the time. You know, as a Spotify customer, I find that very insulting. But I have been playing it during this session, and I started off playing an artist that I like called John Smith, who's a very good singer-songwriter, British singer-songwriter. Played one of his albums, and now it's playing someone called Theon Regan, who I confess I've never heard of. It's on mute, has been throughout the session. I hasten to add this was a little experiment on my part. But, doesn't that show, though, well, actually, Paul, if I could come to you first. You said earlier on that the autoplay which is what I'm featuring here by discussing that appears on streaming services on Amazon, can easily be turned off. Was that a bit of a dig at the other services, or are they also, do they have those features as far as you know?
I don't know, actually. No, it wasn't intended as a dig, that's for certain. It was more intended about our focus on our customers, which is what Amazon always tries to do. You know, I think we've always.
Why is autoplay set by default like that? So it's playing something I didn't ask for.
Well, again, you're on Spotify, so I'll let someone else give you the precise answer, but I'll tell you our answer. And as I said before, we're lucky in streaming to have access to a lot of data, as in we have a lot of customers listening to lots of music, and that means we can measure the impact of these things. And we don't do these things and make them up and think that they might be good and leave them. We always measure them, and we'll continue to do that if and when it shows that people are enjoying it.
Okay. I don't need a long answer on these. It's just a little opening skirmish. But Eleanor, what's your sort of response to that from Apple's point of view? Do you have it set by default, and is it easy to change?
We do have it set by default. We only launched autoplay very recently. I think it was towards the end of last year. And yes, it can be changed easily and turned off. The reason we did it was to make it a better consumer experience.
And Horatio?
Just have the music.
Sorry, Eleanor. Horatio?
Yeah, it goes automatically into autoplay. Once again, it responds to activity on the part of the users if they skip or change, or essentially keeps adjusting all the time. But
I've just left it on. We're on to Matthew and the Atlas now on mine. How do I switch it off if I don't like? Because I quite like playing a record, an album, and when it's finished, I'd like it to stop. How do I do that on Spotify?
I'm quite sure there's a way to do it. I can't just the top of my head tell you.
Can you write to us and tell us? Because I've been trying to work it out for ages, how to do that. And there's a serious point to my question, and that's that we were talking earlier about what is it? Is it a radio play? Is it a sale? And so on. And actually, I think I disagree with Steve Bryan. I think actually you gave three different answers, the three different witnesses. I think pretty much, Horatio, you were giving the line that it's a sale. Effectively, it's a making available right. I think, Eleanor, you were saying it's a license, and I think Paul was saying it was a kind of a hybrid. It's just you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Is that? You can. Is that an unfair representation of what each of you said? You don't need a long answer, but just is it an unfair representation, Horatio?
I can start. I don't think I was saying it was a sale. I was saying it was a new kind of thing. It was a sui generis kind of right. It is clearly a license from a contractual perspective. And my point is like trying to equate it to a rent, to a lease or a rental or a sale wasn't really quite adequate.
Well, that's interesting because I felt perhaps you were pushing back slightly on it because. What you said was closer to what the record labels say, if I could put it that way, in response to the same question on the committee. And I know Spotify is still partially owned by one of the majors. Does that have any influence on the way that Spotify chooses to answer that question about what it is?
Not at all.
Okay.
It is true that a couple of the labels own a very small passive percentage of our equity, but that doesn't influence the way we think about it. By the way, I did figure out how to turn off autoplay.
Okay, well, you don't need to tell us now, but perhaps you could tell us later so that I don't use up all the committee's time on my own little personal problems.
I was very proud of myself that I figured it out.
Well, I'm amazed. You're a wiser man than me, Horatio. So can we move on to talking about the major rights holders who've appeared before the committee and play a big part in our inquiry? Have we established pretty much that about 80%, would you say, or 70%? What is the figure of music that's licensed to you that customers listen to that comes from the major record labels? Would you say, Paul? Have you got any idea of what the answer to that is?
Sure, I'll give you two numbers here. I think for the overall, using official chart company data for the overall UK market segment last year, a little over 75% of streams came from major labels.
Okay.
For Amazon Music, it was just a bit below that, actually. So,
okay.
close to a percentage point below that.
Okay. And Eleanor and Horatio, what are the figures for your companies?
I actually don't have that figure to hand.
Okay.
What Paul has said sounds roughly correct for us as well, but I would have to double check.
Okay. You can correct the record later if there's any problem with that. And Horatio?
Likewise, I think roughly those numbers sound right. I will add the footnote that what you're seeing also is the number of content from independent labels that is sort of breaking into the top most streams songs has been creeping up over the years quite significant.
But it's fair to say you wouldn't really have a business without the deals you've got to be able to use the music of the majors. Is that correct, Horatio?
That is correct. I think the combination of the catalogs of certainly the three largest majors is sort of an indispensable component of the service.
Is it fair to say that it's the majors that really require that revenue share model to be used that we talked about earlier on, where the money's put into one big pool, and which some artists have complained about? They think it's unfair. Some accountants we've heard of think it's inefficient, because of unattributable income and other things, digital breakage and so on. Managers and lawyers have told us that it lacks a certain amount of transparency because of non-disclosure agreements and so on. But is it fair to say, and I'll ask Horatio this question, that basically that revenue share model is used because that's what the major labels want to be used as a way of divvying up the revenue?
I mean, to be fair, historically, I don't know exactly how the rev share was adopted. I know that has become the way all the labels do business. Which is not to say that if there were an alternative way of calculating revenue, different players in the industry wouldn't be open to consider it. But obviously, I can't speak for the labels. I can only speak on behalf of Spotify and say that we would be open-minded about it.
So I think we've established then that that none of the streaming services, that you'd all be fairly agnostic if there was a different means found to distribute the revenue, as long as you've got your share, that the 30% that we've heard about, that everybody seems to confirm is the figure, roughly. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that the time has come now for the UK industry to come together and to openly model and analyse what other distribution models could look like, and Amazon would be willing and would actually be very keen to be part of that. I think it's time that we did look at how other models might work. I think that some of those other models are not just the user-centric licensing that you talked about, perhaps also the artist growth model, which uses like a digressive scales approach that was proposed by the Association of Independent Music. We should take a look at a number of these approaches. They need to be modelled. We need to make decisions like this based on data, and we need to really see what the impact of applying that model en masse across a whole UK industry could be. But we'd certainly be keen to see that modelling take place.
And just with short answers, perhaps, Eleanor and Horatio, would you both be willing to join in that endeavour?
I think I'd have to come back to you with specifics, but in terms of joining in an endeavour and what that looks like. But yes, I think it's certainly very interesting. And the key thing for us is that then there needs to be consensus among all licensors. It's not a model that you can apply to some licensors and not to others. So obviously the only way to reach consensus like that is to get together as an industry.
And Horatio, would you be willing to try some reform or have a look into it in that way?
Absolutely. We would be open-minded and be willing to explore it and work with others on it. The one caveat, obviously, it has to be a model that works at scale. And also you have to understand that there's a good likelihood that whatever model is adopted would have to be viewed from the point of view of would a model like that work globally, as opposed to creating just unique variations of the model in different markets. Licensing the content on a global basis is an incredibly large challenge as it is today. So making sure that it's an efficient way of doing it and that can operate at scale would have to be one of the key characteristics of it.
But is the main obstacle to that at the moment the majors' unwillingness to, at the moment, the majors' unwillingness to look at alternative models?
To be fair, I'm not sure that I would have said, people around the table and talking about it and analyzing, whether artists in fact would fare better, where would it come from, what is the equitable distribution of these things. The market, just keep in mind, the market is already at play. There is disruption in the market, competition that is happening in the label space, where there's a whole new breed of label services companies and digital distributors and others that are in real time challenging the economic model of the major labels.
Okay, and you have pointed that out, and in fairness, I think Universal said they might be interested in this. David Joseph, when he's in front of us, indicated he might be interested. It'll be interesting to see if the others will join in. When the chief executive of Warner appeared before us, he described publishing as secondary rights. I always thought the song came first, but there we are. But he described it as secondary rights. Is that the way it works? That when Warner Music negotiate their rights with you, they basically get the first slice of the pie, and publishing sort of takes what's ever left. Is that the process? So in effect, if Warner knows you'll pay out 70% of your revenue, they take 55%. You can only give 15% to publishing. Is that correct, Horatio?
Well, we actually negotiate our agreements with two different entities, with Warner Chappell on the one hand on the publishing side, and with Warner Music on the other side. For the most part, the people who are involved are different, and even the people on our side are different in those negotiations.
But they're from the same corporation, essentially, yes, aren't they? Yeah. And just to confirm, sorry to cut across you, just to confirm, I think you did say earlier on, 15% is the figure, isn't it, in the UK for publishing with Spotify?
I think that's probably a global rough figure. I think that would be consistent with testimony that I've heard has been offered in the context of these hearings in the last few weeks.
Do you know what the figure is?
Not right off the top of my head. This is something that could be calculated.
But it's well, 15% was the figure that perhaps you'll be able to tell the committee that. What about with Eleanor, with Apple, and Paul with Amazon, as far as the publishing goes?
Shall I go first? It's certainly not the way we've ever sort of set things up. We've never gone, hey labels, how much do you want, and whatever's left goes to the publishers. From that standpoint, publishing is just as important, and we negotiate them separately. As with Horatio, we're generally negotiating with completely different people.
What percentage goes to publishing?
That's something I'd rather provide to you in writing privately, if that's okay. This is commercial terms of agreements.
Would it be fair to say, though, it's in the ballpark of 15%?
Yes.
And Paul?
Yeah, so of the 70% that we pay out, somewhere between 3/4 and 4/5 goes to the label, and the balance does go to publishers, which does put it in about that ballpark, yes.
Isn't it essentially the case that the power of the majors in all of this means that you have to operate a licensing model that suits them, which means that they really decide the broad value of all of these rights, and how the streaming is divvied up? That's essentially what happens here, isn't it, Paul?
Well, we joined this market segment slightly later than others. It was an established model when we sought the licenses we needed to be able to run Amazon Music, and that was the established model that was there at the time. So it's hard for me to comment on how it got to be that way and who influenced it.
Okay. I think one of the issues in the inquiry that's come up is the suggestion that there's really a competition issue because of that major's market power, given that they own both recording and publishing rights. But some rights are more equal than others, it seems, within the music business, so that they favor those that have a propensity to add more to their profit than other rights. ultimately, obviously, your businesses are all based here on the creativity of the artists whose work appear in the platform. If this committee recommended and the government were to decide to create a legal framework that enables the activities of companies like yours to benefit British artists, songwriters, performers more equitably than at present, is that something that you would welcome? Horatio.
As I said before, I think we are supportive of any efforts that, improve the equitable distribution of revenues in the industry. So we would be well disposed to engage in a discussion to that effect. Okay,
Eleanor.
Equitable is a very complex term because reasonable people can disagree on what equitable means. So yes, we absolutely happy for the discussion. From our standpoint, artists should be paid for their work, creators should be paid for their work, and it's what we strive to do every single day. So absolutely happy to have any discussion on what is and is not equitable, because it's not a straightforward question.
Paul?
My focus on this would be around making this industry, the UK music industry, sustainable for the very long term. I think that does mean that we need to ensure that all parts of it, be it streaming services, record labels of all sizes, artists, musicians, songwriters, can find a way to earn money from it. So I would be supportive of anything that looks at different ways to ensure that was the case. I'd like to do that with the long term. I want this industry to be here in 50 years' time. It's been where I've spent all my working life, and I do want to see it having a long, vibrant future.
Yeah, I just want to finish with a couple of questions to you, Horatio, because I was watching very closely what Daniel Ek said yesterday at the Stream On event. And one of the things he said was, and I quote, "We have to be a lot more transparent than we've been before." What do you think he meant by that? And what was he referring to?
I think just in general, there are certain aspects of the market and the industry that have a high degree of opacity, where data is not really as transparent, and where companies are, just taking advantage of the lack of transparency that exists. I think that, we believe that because of the way streaming works, that there is a lot more data that can flow to the different actors in the industry, including artists and musicians, and that can be valuable to them. Okay, and Dawn Ostroff said, in answer to that question, is Spotify like radio in a sense, which was what we had at the beginning of our session today. And I think you were knocking that one back a bit, Horatio, but she actually said our job is sucking listeners away from radio. Mm-hmm. So is that what Spotify's mission is, to suck listeners away from radio? If that's the case, shouldn't musicians who get equitable remuneration from radio plays be reasonably entitled to get equitable remuneration from streaming, particularly when it plays to you, as I demonstrated earlier, something based on an algorithm, something that I haven't necessarily asked for? Yeah, I don't think she quite said that we are like radio. I think what she said was that the market opportunity for us includes $30 billion of advertising revenue in the radio industry that we have the opportunity to tap into by, capitalizing on what's been the reality in video and in other parts, which is linear content services, tend to give way to more interactive content services, that highly personalized content services, like the one that we provide. So we think we can provide an audio content listening experience that is better than the radio listening experience for a user, and take advantage of the advertising revenue that's there. And in doing so, obviously benefit. But if you're successful, Horatio, in reducing radio listens, you'll also be successful in reducing payment through equitable remuneration to musicians. Is it not an unreasonable point to make that if that mission does succeed, that equitable remuneration, which currently goes to musicians from radio plays in the UK, should go to musicians
through streaming plays?
Yes, it's not going to happen overnight,
Okay.
and there is no guarantees that it will happen completely. But we expect that to see some of the same dynamics that we've seen in video, which is as dynamic content, personalized content listening on streaming platforms becomes better, people will want to leverage that service as opposed to this radio offering.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. Alex Davies-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. And just to build on that question, the last question that Kevin asked Paul, if I was to ask my Alexa now to play some pop or rock music, and she actually might go off because I've just called her, isn't that exactly like me putting the radio on? And wouldn't that be a communication to the public rather than just making music available to them?
I think it is different. I think it's much more interactive. We will use data from what you've listened to before to be able to select what to play you there. You're able to skip, you're able to pause, you're able to rewind, you're able to ask Alexa, I hope I haven't set her off there, to what the name of that artist is, and then go and explore more of that artist's catalogue. So I think there are many ways in which it's much more interactive than radio. So I don't think it's the same thing at all, but I do understand the point that's being made here that there's some element of similarities that you're highlighting.
Okay, thank you. Horacio, if I could come to you now, please. Just so I can clarify, do you share any of the unique user identifiers with advertisers to help them personalize their adverts in the same way that you personalize the music that you recommend to people that they stream?
We don't share unique user identifiers with advertisers, no.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that. That's really good to know. And then I'd like to ask all of you, please, in turn. Horacio, coming to you first because I've just finished with you. All of your streaming services have done really well during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many are now posting quarterly profits for the first time ever. Are you confident that these current gains are sustainable? Or do you expect to see these numbers fall back down when live music can finally return and the bricks and mortar shops are able to reopen?
You want me to start?
Yes, please.
So, we think we did well under the circumstances over the last year. It wasn't necessarily a banner year. In fact, I think in the beginning, throughout 2020, we saw advertising revenue suffer. We did prove to be incredibly resilient. And in fact, it was important for the music industry and important for artists that revenue stream continued to be there. And we managed to grow, but we believe we would have grown even faster in the absence of the sort of the extraordinary circumstances that we all had to go through. But we are, as I've said before, we're committed to audience streaming. It's our core business. It's our existential bet. Our business model has proven to be solid, and we think we can continue to grow the pie, and we think that we can enable others in the music ecosystem, so to speak, to do better. We have had a growth trajectory that's been very strong over the years. And in some sense, we are at the beginning of the journey, which is very, very exciting. So, valuation of the company is not something we control. It's a function of what investors think the long-term potential of the company is. We don't look at it. We don't focus on it. We focus on our operating performance and how well we do. If investors think there's a opportunity for them there in the long term, that's really up to them. But we are very, very committed and really excited about the opportunities in the future.
Okay, thank you. Eleanor, if I could come to you next, please. Do you anticipate any fall in your revenue as a result of live music returning?
Well, honestly, I won't and can't predict the future, because if you'd asked me a year ago to predict the future, absolutely everything I said would have been wrong. So I'm not going to try, but from our standpoint, we feel like if we just keep continuing to provide customers with a great experience, they'll come back for more. But I would also add on top of that we desperately want and can't wait for the live and the touring industries to come back so that artists can create and express themselves in all of the ways that they want to and should have the ability to do so, both for themselves and for the whole sort of economy and ecosystem that sits around them. So we're just going to keep doing the best thing we can for our customers and for artists and songwriters.
You and me both. And then finally, Paul, just to come to you, please.
Sure. So if we look at the overall data provided by Entertainment Retailers Association and BPI, although music streaming did continue to grow in 2020, it actually grew at a slower rate than it had done at either of the previous 2 years. And that's true for Amazon Music in the UK as well. So I don't know that we can say that it was actually, there was an impact, a positive impact, or really even a negative impact from the situation we found. I think maybe it impacted on what people chose to listen to and when they listened. I know I used to listen to most of my music on my commutes, and of course, not doing that anymore, I have to fit it into other times in my day. So I don't think there is a direct link. I actually think I've seen some interesting data, and I don't know how accurate it would be, that suggests a causal link between the growth of music streaming and the growth in the live business, and suggesting that as people discover more artists through streaming, they're actually more likely to go out and see them live. And I hope that's true, and I hope that artists people have discovered in the last year can enjoy touring again in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. No more questions from me.
Thank you, Alex.
So thanks for watching. The next video will be a continuation of this session. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.